Search for Nancy Guthrie. We do know 3 people were detained. Police activity could be seen 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, and local police in several unmarked vehicles.
Something changed the moment investigators walked back into that house. Not the first time, not during the initial sweep when everything seemed calm and ordinary, but the second time, when they returned without any announcement, without any cameras following them, without any explanation given to the public. That second visit is what matters. That second visit is what shifted everything. Let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what the FBI found, you need to understand what kind of woman Nancy Guthrie was and what kind of night this all started on. By every account, Nancy was not a reckless person. She was careful, grounded, someone who kept her world small and safe on purpose. She had people she loved. She had routines she trusted. She had a home that felt secure. So when she disappeared, not during some chaotic event, not after an argument, not in the middle of a dangerous situation, but after a completely normal evening with her family, the people who knew her were not just scared, they were confused in a way that cut deeper than fear. The night she went missing started the way hundreds of her nights had started before. Dinner with family, laughter in the house, no tension, no raised voices, nothing out of place. She was brought home before 10 o'clock that night, and law enforcement confirmed that detail. But here's the thing that investigators quietly flagged early on. The identity of the person who drove her home was never publicly released. In a case where every single detail gets examined, choosing to withhold one specific detail is not an accident. It is a decision. And decisions like that mean something. When she got home, nothing looked wrong. No lights left on in a panic. No door left open. No signs that she had been afraid or rushed or forced. The house looked the way it always looked at the end of a quiet evening. And by morning, she was gone. The people who entered that house looking for answers did not find a crime scene in the traditional sense. There was no forced entry, no broken lock, no shattered glass, no returned furniture. The absence of those things, which usually tell investigators a story, told its own story here. When someone is taken against their will in a moment of chaos, the environment usually reflects that chaos. A struggle leaves marks. Fear leaves evidence. But Nancy's home was still, and that stillness was not comforting. It was alarming. Investigators know that a calm scene can mean one of 2 things. Either the person left on their own, without sensing any danger in that moment, or whoever came for them was someone they trusted enough not to fight. Both of those possibilities were on the table, and both of them pointed away from the idea of a random crime. This was not a stranger walking in off the street. The evidence, or rather, the complete absence of it, suggested someone familiar, someone expected, someone who did not trigger alarm bells when they showed up. That realization is what moved this case out of the hands of local law enforcement and into federal territory faster than almost anyone expected. The FBI does not step into missing persons cases early without reason. They have their own caseload, their own priorities. When they show up within the first hours and days of a disappearance, it signals that something about the situation has already crossed a threshold. In Nancy's case, that threshold was crossed quickly. Federal investigators brought a different lens to the situation. Where local officers were looking at what was present, what clues the house might hold, the FBI started paying just as much attention to what was absent. The missing details, the unexplained gaps, the things that should have been there but weren't. A phone in a specific place, medication untouched, personal items left behind in a way that didn't match the idea of someone who had planned to leave. These are not dramatic discoveries. They don't make headlines on their own. But to a trained investigator, they are loud. Then the ransom communication entered the picture, and the nature of the investigation shifted again. Once messages began circulating, once demands were made and then shared, the case moved into a different legal and strategic space entirely. Communication that crosses state lines, that uses electronic devices, that appears coordinated and deliberate, falls under federal jurisdiction. The FBI wasn't just involved anymore. They were running the show. And when that happens, the flow of public information slows down dramatically. Not because nothing is happening, but because too much is happening to risk saying the wrong thing out loud. Every word released to the media becomes a potential signal to whoever is watching. And in a case involving ransom, someone is always watching. So the public statements became shorter. The updates became less frequent. And then they almost stopped entirely. That silence was not confusion. It was a wall deliberately built to protect the integrity of what investigators were uncovering inside. Now here is where things get important. Investigators processed Nancy's home in the standard way, carefully, methodically, documenting everything in a specific sequence such chain of evidence would hold. They bagged items. They photographed corners of rooms that might seem irrelevant to anyone else. They noted the position of furniture, the state of the kitchen, the condition of her bedroom. The whole house was treated as a document that needed to be read. And then, once they felt they had gathered what they needed, they cleared the scene. That should have been it. In most investigations, clearing a scene and moving on is the natural progression. You process it, you learn from it, you move forward. But that's not what happened here. The house was revisited. Investigators came back. And that return, quiet as it was, unannounced as it was, is one of the most significant moments in this entire case. When law enforcement returns to a cleared scene, it almost always means one thing. Something they found somewhere else changed the meaning of something inside that house. New information surfaced, from digital records, from a witness account, from a timestamp that didn't add up, and suddenly a detail that seemed minor during the first walkthrough became critical. The second visit was not about finding something they missed. It was about confirming something they now suspected. And what investigators were piecing together by that point had to do not just with the physical space of the home, but with the digital one. Modern investigations run on two tracks simultaneously: the physical evidence you can hold in your hand, and the digital evidence that exists in logs, timestamps, and metadata that most people never think about. In Nancy's home, both tracks were being followed. Smart devices record more than people realize. A thermostat that adjusts at an unusual hour, that a door sensor that logs an opening and closing at a time that doesn't match anyone's account off the evening. A router that shows a device connecting to the network and then going dark at a specific moment. These are not things that can be manipulated after the fact. They happen in real time and they store automatically, and they don't lie. Investigators were reconstructing the final hours inside that house minute by minute using data that the house itself had collected without anyone asking it to. Phone activity told its own part of the story. When was the last message sent? When did the screen go dark? Did the location data stop abruptly? Or did it continue moving? Was the phone left behind deliberately? Or did it disappear along with its owner? Each of those questions Hassan answered buried in the device's own logs, and those answers were being pulled apart and examined against the timeline that investigators had already built from witness statements and physical evidence. What they found, and this is the part that cannot be fully disclosed, the part that explains why investigators went so quiet, was a pattern that did not match the story being told. The timeline had inconsistencies. Small ones, maybe the kind that could be explained away individually. But when you line them up together, when you place the digital record next to the physical record next to the account of what happened that night, the inconsistencies stopped looking accidental. They started looking intentional. That discovery that the story being presented and the story the evidence was telling were not the same story is what sent investigators back to the house. Not in a rush, not with sirens, not with the kind of dramatic entry that signals an arrest is coming. They went back quietly, carefully, because they were not yet at the stage of confrontation. They were at the stage of confirmation, and confirmation requires precision. The visit to the relative's home followed the same pattern. Late in the evening, local deputies arrived without fanfare. Lights on inside for hours. No public statement afterward. In true crime coverage, moments like this get framed as accusations, as if the visit itself is proof of guilt. But that reading misses how investigations actually work. Going to a relative's home during an active missing persons case often means filling in a gap, verifying a timeline detail, confirming who was where at a specific moment, collecting something that had been identified as relevant from another piece of evidence. It is administrative and precise, not theatrical. What it signals, though, is focus. By the time investigators are making targeted visits to specific addresses, they are no longer casting a wide net. They are following a thread they believe they have found. The investigation had moved from the question of what happened to the much harder question of who made it happen, and whether the story surrounding Nancy's disappearance was designed to look a certain way from the beginning. The ransom element of this case deserves its own scrutiny, because ransom cases are not always what they appear to be on the surface. Sometimes a demand is made not because someone was taken, but to create the appearance that someone was taken. A ransom note can be a story constructed after the fact, designed to redirect attention toward an outside threat and away from something closer to home. Investigators are trained to read the language of those communications, the structure of the demands, the timing of when they were sent, whether they reveal knowledge that only someone on the inside would have. These are not things the public sees, but they are things investigators weigh very carefully. The FBI's ongoing presence in this case was never just about finding Nancy. It was about understanding the architecture of what occurred, who built it, why they built it, and whether it was solid enough to hold under the weight of a federal investigation. And based on everything that has been gathered, everything that has been quietly confirmed, Andre confirmed, through those return visits and targeted follow-ups, the architecture appears more fragile than whoever constructed it had hoped. Cases like this rarely end with a single dramatic moment. There is no scene where everything clicks into place at once, and the truth comes flooding out. Instead, it happens the way water moves through rock, slowly, persistently, finding every crack until the structure gives way. The FBI works on that timeline, not the public's timeline, not the media's timeline, their own methodical, evidence-driven timeline. What was found inside Nancy Guthrie's home was not one thing. It was a collection of things that, taken individually, might each have a reasonable explanation. But together, stacked against the digital record, the physical evidence, the behavioral inconsistencies, and the gaps in the story, they form a picture. And that picture is what investigators have been working from carefully and quietly ever since they decided to go back. The silence from authorities is not emptiness. It is the sound of people who know more than they are saying, moving carefully toward something they are not yet ready to announce. When that announcement comes, and in federal investigations of this nature, it almost always does, it will not come as a surprise to the people who have been working inside this case. It will only come as a surprise to the rest of us if this story raises questions for you. If the details don't quite add up in the way they've been presented, you are not alone. The investigators feel the same way, and they are not done yet. Stay with us as this case continues to develop, because the most important chapter of Nancy Guthrie's story has not yet been written. Like and subscribe so you don't miss it when